We have Adam Wooten here from the Middlebury Institute. He's going to be talking about career in localization and translation. I have to be honest, I'm not completely sure what localization is. I have some ideas, but I'm excited to learn about this. He teaches in an online Master's Localization Project Management Program. He's a co-founder and advisor of AccuLink and co-founder of the Silicon Slopes Localization Chapter. And he received his BA in Spanish translation here at BYU, and then went on and an MA in translation and an MBA in international management from the Middlebury Institute. So join me in welcoming Adam, and I'm excited to hear what he's going to share.
Thank you. Yeah, people often ask where so I also teach at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, and I know most people have never heard of that unless you're in a very specific industry like translation or international policy. So we have a lot of famous grads in the in the world of in the Mormon world who graduated studying international policy and development there. Like if you ever saw the Meet the Mormons video, that guy Bishnu Adhikari who brought water to Nepal, that was to remote villages in Nepal. He was a good friend of mine at the Institute, good guy, and and a lot of others. But I'm here to talk about careers in language. And there's really quite an ever-changing landscape of possibilities for those who study language. And so I want to talk about what opportunities exist, what you need to know to succeed in these careers, what to do, and who you need to know to boost your language career. Now, ideally, every language student would graduate like I try to make sure that my students graduate with not only a diploma, but also a resume and a network. And fortunately, I know that BYU is really good at helping with that as well, with experiential learning and the very strong BYU network. But let's talk first about what opportunities exist for those who want to work in the language services industry. Like I said, there are a lot of possibilities, but there are so many language professionals that wish they had known about these possibilities much sooner. There are a lot of college students who would love to prepare for a career in language services, but oftentimes you don't even hear about it so much here, because there aren't a lot of 5-year-olds who show up at career day and kindergarten saying, hey, when I grow up, I want to interpret for international conferences, or translate technical patents, or manage localization projects, right? Like even, so many adults don't even know what localization is. So of course, we don't, and there's no uniform for most of this as well. So we don't hear about this in many career days. And perhaps that's maybe because we're kind of victims of our own success. Good language service providers, in order to be good at our jobs, we often need to be invisible, right? In order to really communicate what others are trying to communicate in another language, we want people to forget that we exist because we're doing our jobs so well. So for that reason, the language services industry is often called the biggest industry you've never heard of. And even inside the industry, sometimes language professionals working on one end never hear about the amazing opportunities on the other end of the industry. So we often try to raise awareness in presentations to university students like this, talking about the basics like the difference between translation and interpreting. How many of you knew there was a difference between translation and interpreting? Right? So not everybody. If you've ever seen the movie The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman, where she's an interpreter at the UN, there's a reason why it's called The Interpreter, is because she deals with spoken language, not written language. It's like the difference between libel and slander. Hopefully a little bit more positive, though. So some of us want to raise awareness about the opportunities beyond the basics. So some of us, like I've tried to create these charts showing the many different possibilities. There's so many different potential job titles where you're working primarily as a linguist, or working in managing language services, or working in the technical or even the audiovisual aspects of it. So I've tried to create many visuals like this, but these are kind of limited. Yeah, they show, wow, there's a lot of opportunity, and I've never even heard of half of those job titles, is what many students will say. But then I've also had students ask, well, can you tell me a little bit more about a typical career path in an industry like this? So in the past, I've tried to create these examples saying, oh, well, you could be start out as a junior project manager managing language translation projects, and then go into a full project manager, and then senior, right? And I've tried to create these nice linear steps up. And these are also incredibly limited. These ideas are far too restricting, because so many of my colleagues who have been very successful in the industry have not followed this very linear path. They've gone all over the place. So I attempted to illustrate these twists and turns a little bit less linearly by sharing, for example, my own career path, where I started out as learning Spanish primarily in Chile on my mission. Then I got my bachelor's in Spanish translation here. While I was a student here, I started to gain experience as a linguist, even working as a court interpreter down in the Orem and Provo courts. Then I also got a minor in business management and took a life-changing course on translation technology here. How many of you have taken that translation technology course here? Good. You should check it out in what is the localization minor. Then I went to the Middlebury Institute, which we often call MIS, and thought I wanted to study both translation and interpreting, but I learned that there are these other opportunities. I learned that I could combine my language skills with business skills and technology skills. So I tried to create some examples of this, even using other careers from other BYU grads and MIS grads, just to show some of the examples of twists and turns. But there were still so many alternatives that I was not illustrating, and I knew there had to be a better way. Fortunately, one of my colleagues, who was a high-powered executive at a $1.5 billion language company, she started to illustrate this as more of an ecosystem of language professionals. And I thought that was a good idea, to kind of show a little bit of proximity, a little bit of relationship without something too strictly linear. And that was great. There's still a lot of job titles that are left off of this. But I wanted to do more. So just to kind of illustrate just how big the opportunity is and how many different places you could go. So I wanted to illustrate a wide range of options, a lot of opportunities to progress, and some relationships between those opportunities. And so I got an idea from my love of hiking. Living in Utah, conveniently, I do like hiking. And I created this graphic right here that shows various different possibilities for career paths in language services that aren't so strictly linear. And this is now what my path looks like, different from what I had. I actually started out, as one of my first language-related jobs was as a language teacher at the MTC. Then I got into working as a translator and an interpreter. Then I got into doing a little bit of sales of language technology while I was still a student. Was able to then do some multilingual desktop publishing, so formatting for a newspaper. Working as a translator again, and you'll notice I'm kind of going up and down and all over the place. Started to manage interpreters, manage translators, and grow in seniority there. Then got back into sales and marketing for some translation companies. I worked as a general manager. Then I got to focus on technology, being head of automated language solutions for a company. Then went back into sales, back into management, and then eventually owning my own company, and then becoming an educator. And then as a consultant, I got to see a lot of different opportunities over on with various different companies, and just kind of touch all different aspects of the industry. So I show you this not to brag about what I've accomplished, but just to show you that there are so many different options in the language industry. There's so many things that you can do, so many other types of skills that you can combine your language skills with to have a successful career in the industry. And if you want to see this graphic in more detail, feel free to scan that QR code to check that out. But yeah, I've been able to work in a lot of different things. I've been able to oversee the translation of video games. I've been able to oversee translations of some very high stakes kinds of things. Like a number of years ago, I got to uh, lead a project to transcribe and translate the trials of Saddam Hussein and Chemical Ali and other former deposed Iraqi leaders, and that was quite interesting. It was originally supposed to be a much bigger project with 11 trials, and then if anyone remembers anything about that, it ended up being a lot shorter because everyone was dead after 2 trials, and so that was just another interesting thing about that. But I've gotten to work with a lot of different types of people, including on that project, working with some of the Arabic translation and transcription managers. I remember one day having lunch with them and feeling a little bit of panic, right? Because this is transcription and translation of criminal trials, right? Criminal war trials, and they're very important, and you need to get everything just right. And I remember over lunch they told me, we're not translating everything exactly as it is, right? And I almost choked on my food saying, I'm sorry, what? We're halfway through the project and you're telling me that we're not actually doing what we're supposed to do? They said, no, let us explain. In Arabic, how many Arabic speakers do we have in here, by the way? Oh, I'm surprised. Maybe one? Okay. Studied for a year? Okay. So they said, in Arabic, there's so many references to Allah that it ends up being almost every word there's some little reference to Allah. And if we included every reference to Allah in the English translation, it would say God this, God that, and it just wouldn't make sense. So we throw in a few here and there, but we can't, it would be so unreadable if we included absolutely every single reference to Allah that was in the Arabic. So that's what we mean, right? There was a little bit of linguistic adaptation there so that it would make sense. But anyway, so I created this and to illustrate some of the many opportunities that are there. And this landscape is still changing. So I kind of need to update this because the big important part of this is this distant mountain in the back there, that has the abbreviations AI, you know what that stands for, and MT, which stands for machine translation, right? That peak back there, that's really a distant volcano that's gradually grown and now is erupting all over the place, raining down AI ash on top of us all. And yes, it seems very scary to see the spewing lava and the falling ash, but does this also create new peaks and new opportunities? Does all this ash become very fertile, create much more fertile ground and everything that it's covering for new things to grow? So we're seeing in a lot of surveys new language roles at these LSPs, or language service providers, where you're getting a lot of different roles, new roles that you never would have expected before, particularly roles that combine language and technology skills. And again, still, some of this can be quite scary, has people questioning, will all of this be out with the old and in with the new? Or will we see more career shifts than career replacements? I personally happen to think that we're going to see a lot of career shifts. For those who want to take advantage and learn the new things, learn what AI can do for language and whatever your career is, you're going to have opportunities for shifts. Not so much just saying, okay, everybody who's working in language now needs to retire because the new generation is going to come in. I think there's a lot of opportunity, which, by the way, being a student right now, I think is just perfect timing for you all. Because while everybody else is out there saying, oh, I would love to go back to school and kind of retrain for what's all this stuff that's happening now, that's right at the moment that you all are being trained. And so you're going to be going out at a time when you know a lot of this technology. If you're taking the time to take some classes to learn this technology, you're going to go out and graduate at a time when everybody else is just barely learning it as well. And it's a great time to grow and add a lot of value. Now, fortunately, this language industry, some have said it might possibly be the best prepared industry for this AI revolution. Because actually, machine translation is the original AI. Wherever machine translation research has been done, wherever AI research has been done since the 30s, 40s, and 50s, translation has been the top focus, the original focus. Because everyone thought, well, if we can handle language translation, we can handle anything. And so this industry actually has a lot of people who've been working with AI for the longest time. I tell people, yeah, I teach courses on AI for translation. And people I've just met say, oh, interesting. So you've only been doing that now for about 3 years? Because they think that AI was invented 3 years ago. And I said, no, actually, I've been doing this for more than a decade, because AI has existed in translation for the longest time. And so partly because of that, because the industry has been using a lot of technology, including AI, including previous iterations of transformers that were originally created for machine translation, we have a lot of experience actually adapting to technology and AI, prioritizing, augmenting humans, so that hopefully, since our industry has been using this already, hopefully this won't look so much like Pompeii. I tend to be a little bit more optimistic about these upcoming changes, where I think, as I was saying, I think that this fertile ash will actually help a lot of things to grow in the industry. So knowing that, there are certain things that you should know. And there are certain things that language students and new grads need to know in order to prepare for this evolving future. First off, you need to know that diversification reduces risk. You need to avoid focusing on only one extreme or another in your studies. Diversification is really going to help you out. Now, the language industry is one that is consistently growing at a very positive rate. For years, it has frequently grown faster than the economy as a whole. It's, like I said, it's often considered the biggest industry you've never heard of. Some people have even said that this industry is recession-proof, because in past recessions, when everything else was shrinking, our industry was still growing a little bit. A couple of pundits have said there's a good reason for this, because when business is good, people translate contracts. And when the economy suffers a downturn, we translate lawsuits. So either way, right? It kind of helps that our own industry is already so diversified. There's so many different things that you can translate or localize and adapt. And that gets us feeling rather positive about things in general. When translation and companies have been asked, how do you feel generative AI is going to impact your language services business this year? A majority from small, medium, and large businesses are saying, you know what, we think it's going to have a positive impact. But not everybody views things this way. There are some that preach doom and gloom, and they'll often show something like this next graphic that I'm going to show you. And I want you to analyze this critically, because you're probably going to see something even similar in other industries as well. Some people say, look, decades ago, we had all this human translation being done, right, up at the top here. It was just human translation. And then after, a number of years ago, as time progressed on this axis, we started seeing that there was an increase in machine translation. Now, for a few years, we've seen machine translation plus these large language models. They're doing even more translation. And pretty soon we're going to see this advanced language AI that's going to be doing phenomenal amounts of translation. And looking at this graphic, that can look pretty threatening to humans. But can anybody tell me, do you see any potential problems with this chart or this graphic? What do you?
It maintains the number, or like the amount of language work as constant. Or
Yes.
like the actual language work that's getting done is probably vastly increasing.
Bingo. It assumes that the volume of language translation has not changed at all over these years, when nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, machine translation and large language models are partly responsible for an increase in the need for translation. In fact, even years ago, when the United Nations first started using machine translation, yes, of course, the translators that worked there were really fearful that that was going to replace them. What they found instead is that it actually increased the amount of translation that they needed done. And it freed them up from doing stuff that they didn't want to do. Translators were previously being interrupted constantly by people handing them a document saying, hey, could you just tell me what this says real quick? Can you just tell me what this says? And it interrupted them constantly throughout the day, so they hardly even got to the work that they really enjoyed, of really translating important documents of the United Nations. And then with the introduction of machine translation at the UN, they stopped getting interrupted because people could find out the gist of what something was saying, even with really crappy, lousy machine translation that was very imperfect. They could get the gist of that without interrupting the translators. And as they would get the gist of that, they would say, oh yeah, this doesn't look like an important document at all. Or, oh, this looks like a really important document. Maybe I should submit this to the translation department and have them translate it. So it actually increased things. So this is actually what a more accurate chart would look like with a little bit of speculation in pink. So over time we see that yes, we have human translation, machine translation does a whole lot, but human translation increases. And the machine translation plus large language models, that translates even more, but still human translation is increasing. And it'll continue to increase, until maybe we have some science fiction result like Skynet from Terminator being created, and right, something like that. But whether or not that will actually happen is more of a philosophical debate. And personally, I don't believe that we're ever going to really achieve general artificial intelligence. But if you believe it, hey, that's up to you. I've actually known some pretty brilliant people who believe that computers will become self-aware one day, and it's inspired to create some really cool technologies that have helped translators a ton. And so I just say, yeah, you can believe what you want. You're creating cool things that help me out. Go for it. I don't mind. We can disagree. If it's inspiring you to create cool things that help people, I don't mind. But yeah, and of course, a lot of what is being translated automatically is the content, the text that is of lower value. Things that are of higher value, that require, that are higher risk, that really need a human touch because lives could be affected in diplomacy, in use of medical devices, or even things that just need that human touch for creativity. Those things that are higher value will continue to require human effort. Now, and like I said, there's so much variety in what's being translated. We see that some things, like life sciences translation, that continues to increase. Video game and entertainment translation, that continues to increase. So this diversification, this does reduce risk, and in your studies, you'll benefit from diversification as well. So I invite you to, those of you who are learning language skills, I invite you to also learn complementary skills. Learn not only hard skills, but soft skills. Learn not only how to work with AI, but also how to work without it. And as you diversify in your studies, you'll find synergies. And again, I'm giving very specific examples about translation. But even as you diversify skills and studies in other areas, you will find synergies that really help. One of those synergies is very apparent in a word that Adam mentioned earlier. That is localization. So localization, how many had heard the word before in this context? All right. For those of you who haven't, localization is not only translation but also adaptation. That adaptation can be cultural, technical, or regulatory. There's lots of different types of adaptation. And there are many different types of products that need adaptation. Mobile apps, video games, online courses, marketing materials, certification exams, all kinds of things that need adaptation beyond just translation of the written word. A fun example I like to give is with Pixar. Pixar does a great job of actually adapting their movies, not just translating them, but... Okay, we're good. Pixar adapts their movies. So for example, the movie Inside Out, the original Inside Out movie, there was a little scene where a young girl was being fed broccoli. And their cultural advisors in Japan said, hey, you know what? This girl looks so disgusted to eat broccoli, but kids in Japan tend to like broccoli. So this isn't going to make any sense at all. So they had to change it to a more generic-looking green vegetable that might look disgusting to a kid. Or in this other scene, there's a scene where the father in the movie is daydreaming about a hockey game, which makes sense in the US and in Canada and maybe a couple other places, but in most of the rest of the world, it made more sense to change that from a hockey game to a soccer game, or what most places would call a football game. So they adapted that so that it would make sense, so that people wouldn't look at that and say, okay, that was too weird, I can't relate to that. Now, localization combines many skill sets that are already in demand. It combines skills, like I said, in business, language, and technology. So it's interdisciplinary. So I recommend that you learn not only language skills, but also complementary skills and how to combine them. Like I said, learn hard skills and soft skills, learn how to work with AI and how to work without it. A survey of professionals in the language services industry found that we're already seeing a huge increase in AI-related roles, that 12 of the top language service providers have employees with AI in the job title, that job titles with AI in the name have increased 8.5 times. This was just last year, so I'm sure it's even more now. Particularly in Portugal, Spain, the UK, and the US, we're seeing a great increase in these AI roles. And yeah, and we're having to learn new skills. So now with all these changes, many professionals kind of fear that they're going to be relegated to basically just doing maintenance on machines, basically cleaning up messes that machines leave. And there are a lot of translators who hate the idea of becoming what we call post-editors, those who clean up machine-translated text. And there are many reasons why they might hate that idea. So we often prefer to plan, build, and create. That sounds much more exciting, especially when you imagine your careers after graduation. You want to plan, you want to build, you want to create. You don't want to clean up messes. And so linguists, translators, often worry, are we just going to be relegated to cleaning up these messes? And I would say, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Linguists shouldn't just be stuck or pigeonholed in one particular role in say, a translation process, where you start out with a source text in one language, and it goes through a machine, an AI, it gets post-edited or cleaned up, and then goes to the target language. This is a bad example. This is kind of a stereotypical, ineffective example of machine translation process that uses what is called the GIGO model. Has anybody here heard of GIGO? G-I-G-O. That stands for garbage in, garbage out. It's a real phenomenon. You're going to hear about it more with AI, where you put a lot of garbage in to train the AI because it needs a lot of data, but a lot of that garbage means that, that goes in eventually comes out as corruption, errors, hallucinations, all kinds of things. But what linguists can do is they can learn a lot of skills. They can get involved, right, especially if they know the technology. They can use their linguistic expertise from beginning to end of a process that involves AI. That requires learning maybe a couple dozen more skills, or maybe several dozen more skills, but that gets them a way to add value throughout the process from beginning to end. And now this process that I just showed you is becoming much less linear, but linguists do still need a lot of additional skills, not just language skills. And that will require quite a shift to where, back in the 2000s, we found that there were, localization is often abbreviated L10N. Just for those of you who are nerds, that's actually not an abbreviation. It's not an acronym. It's called a numeronym because there are 10 letters between the L and the N. That's the only reason why. So, anyways, localization in the 2000s, localization engineers needed to have all these tech skills, know about data and AI and programming and more. Then in the 2010s, language managers started to need to have tech skills. Now we're seeing that even translators in the 2020s need tech skills to really be very, very successful. In a survey last year, 30% of linguists had already upskilled in AI, and 1/5 had started developing prompting skills. So language professionals should consider learning more, even learning a popular language like Python. Then as they understand more about technology, something that we are going to see, and something that we've seen for decades, is that successful use of technology is most likely when we understand what it is that machines do best and what it is that humans do best. And I could talk a whole lot more about this, but I think I need to open this up for questions. So what questions do we have here? And it looks like the ceiling microphones are getting turned on. What questions do we have so far? Yes, Corey.
Started off. So it sounds like you're painting a landscape that the space for localization is expanding. We got that line from.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it is expanding.
How does that impact other aspects of enterprise, of government, of nonprofit? How do you see localization working within other parts of activity?
Yeah, exactly. Right? There's still, right, even in recent years, there have still been so many situations. So, for example, with government dealings and whatnot, or business dealings, there's still so many times where deals need to be done, work needs to be done, and there's a pause to wait for translation or interpreting. And we're going to see now that, at least with a lot of those smaller things, with these, especially the lower risk things, we're not going to need to have that pause. We're going to be able to get a lot more done much more quickly with some instant or at least faster translation that will then lead us to the bigger deals where we'll still need human involvement. And so that's going to help us out a ton. We're going to be seeing an increasingly global world, an increasingly multilingual world, even if it's not every person being multilingual and understanding culture to the degree that many of you do, but still having multilingual capabilities in their pocket to at least tiptoe a little bit into other languages and cultures. And that's going to accelerate a lot of interactions between countries, a lot of business between corporations and individuals. So, hope that answered your question. But what other questions do you have? Yeah, we'll go in the back here and then over on the front.
So for those of us who still have some time as undergraduate students and even moving into graduate studies, when you tell us to kind of diversify our study subjects, what are some examples of what that could look like doing a major in this and a minor in that?
Exactly. Yes. Like maybe you have quite a passion in one particular area, and I understand, like having a particular passion, and then you say, oh, well, I'm going to get a major in this, and I'm going to get a minor in this that's really incredibly closely related to the first thing. Maybe I want to look at something a little bit more different, right? If I'm getting kind of a liberal arts degree, maybe I want more of a tech minor. Or if I'm getting a social science degree, maybe I want a little bit more of a tech or business kind of minor, something to just change things up, even something that works a different part of your brain. Because then when your brain can draw connections between these two very different subjects, you're going to be able to add value in ways that other people can't. So, great question. Over here.
So I don't speak another language, I only speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Your coworkers at where you work and just in your field in general, are these like jobs and positions really just limited to those who have second language experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly, knowing another language and then wanting to really does help when you're managing work with multiple languages, right? Even though I've worked, like I said, I've worked with that Arabic project that I mentioned, or I've worked with on projects to translate video games from Japanese to English or vice versa. I don't know those languages, but still knowing another language did help with those projects, right? And it helped when I got that explanation from that Arabic translation manager. Because I knew another language, when he explained it to me, it helped me to understand a little better what he was trying to do. But at the same time, there are still plenty of jobs, and I've known successful managers of language services who didn't necessarily know another language, and they did have to lean a little bit more on their linguist to explain things to them. But it did help them, even if they didn't fully become fluent in another language, it did help when they were able to at least gain experience in other cultures, traveling a bit, living abroad a little bit, to gain some understanding and some empathy and understanding for this need to adapt to different cultures. So yes, it's definitely an advantage to know other languages and have something as an example, but it's not 100% required in all of the positions. Yes.
Are there any other tech skills other than learning like a programming language that you recommend? Because I miserably suck at programming. So any other tech stuff that you could recommend?
Yeah. Well, so you've tried out programming and you know that you suck at it. Okay, but hey, you know what? I will tell you that even trying to learn programming, even though you haven't gotten to the point where you feel like you're a programmer, I would assume, even trying to learn programming and having at least some basic knowledge of programming does help. That's a good thing, because then when you do have to talk to others who do work in programming, who do a lot more, right, you can respect what they do and understand that's hard for you, and you at least know enough to talk to them a little bit about what they're doing, especially when you eventually need their help with something. So yeah, there are definitely other tech skills that you can learn, or even skills that one might consider more practical. Other tech skills that are definitely increasing in demand include skills with audio and video editing, and work with that. Working with visual, audio, and and video. That in this world of short attention spans, everything's moving to video. So that would definitely be a skill that could be very useful. But even, right, it doesn't have to be computer science focused or computer department focused. It can be, even a lot of business and management skills could be very beneficial. I hope that helps. Yeah. What other questions do we have here? Yes, the orange.
To programming. I have no experience with it at all, and I've also heard it's difficult. What experience do you have with it, and how much does it relate to learning a human language?
Yeah, well, so I would say that there are, right, you're recognizing and using patterns. So I would say that if you do know a language, that does give you a little bit of an advantage in learning a programming language. And I will tell you, I'm not who I would consider a programmer, but I have definitely filled some engineering roles, and I've hired a lot, and I've taught a lot of technology and programming related things to students, but I don't require them to become programmers. And there is a lot that you can do without getting programming skills up to the level of being a programmer or a developer or coder. So, at the very least, becoming familiar with a few things, right? Even dabbling a little bit in a language, like a simpler language like Python, which interestingly enough, Python is often said to be the great beginner programming language to learn, and very conveniently, it is the language that's being used the most right now, that's growing in demand the most because of AI, because of so many applications with AI. So, but no, even learning about these other things doesn't mean you have to learn them to the extent that you become, say, a programmer, right? Learning about business doesn't mean you have to complete an MBA, but still learning enough that you can start to combine skills or think about things from a different perspective using a different part of your brain really does help. Yes.
What sorts of internship opportunities have you seen people really benefit from when it comes to going from an undergraduate or even a graduate experience and into the workforce?
Oh, so many. That's a big question. Certainly, right? I'm always a fan of internship experiences with language companies because you're dealing with so many different things and even different languages and cultures. Any internship experience that has some kind of international experience can be beneficial. But I also want to just kind of put in a little bit of a plug for those of you who don't find your ideal internship experience. There are a lot of volunteer experiences that are equally as beneficial as internship experiences. So there's no excuse to graduate without some kind of experience, because you can find a lot of volunteer opportunities, even with a nonprofit or some kind of cause, whether locally or internationally, where you can gain experience. If you do want to talk more specifically about, it's easier to talk about most beneficial internship experiences when we're talking a little bit more specifically. So if you want to chat afterwards about your specific situation and where you're trying to get, I'd be happy to chat about that. But it looks like we're hitting the time limit right now. So we're going to wrap this up. And again, if anybody has more specific questions afterwards, I'd be happy to stick around for a bit and chat. But thank you for your time.